Hi, y'all. I hope you're having a great week. I know it's hard to get back in the swing of things when you've been off for 2 weeks, but we are going into week 9. And what I want to do is I'd like you to get out your week 8 questions that I gave y'all, and also your 2 sheets I gave you on first 7 Black Americans elected to the Congress. Okay, and we're going to go over some of the information that David Barton gave you last week. We'll have more information this week. And then week 10, we're going to do the Battle of Bunker Hill. One of the guys that we're going to be talking about, because I always like to act stuff out. There really wasn't an opportunity this semester, and I thought, let's do it. I know I probably don't have time to invite the school at the end of. I always usually do it every semester, but we can do it as a class, and it'll be fun. So I'll be giving out water balloons for you to fill up. That's your homework. That's part of your homework. So make sure you have those filled up. Okay, bring them to class, and squirt guns. And anyway, we're going to act it out, and it'll be fun. And it's just fun to know about the Battle of Bunker Hill. There was a guy there named, I was going to talk about it later, but I think his name was James Armistead. Make sure if that's his first name. Oh, I didn't plan on talking about it yet. Anyway, his last name's Armistead. And he was a double agent. And so what he did is he actually was one of the heroes of the Battle of Bunker Hill and got many awards for it, medals. And he pretended he was a freed slave and went to the South. And I believe he was under Cornwallis, and we'll be watching that on the video this week. Anyway, he pretended like he was a freed black slave and got information and passed it to the revolutionaries in the American Revolution. And he became such a favorite of the generals that after a while the general asked him, would you be a spy for us? So he became a double spy. So not only did he give the George Washington and the American revolutionaries, not only did he give them information about what the British were doing, but now he would go back and give the British wrong information about what we were doing. So anyway, he's really credited. Even at the Battle of Yorktown, where we kind of all got in a corner there, and then the French came sailing in. Of course, Benjamin Franklin's the one who got the French to enter the war, and I really think he's a huge hero of the war. He looked like he was partying and dancing over there and having a gay old time in France, but really what he was doing is wooing the people, and the king felt like he couldn't say no, and that he had to send his ships, because the people of France loved Benjamin Franklin. And as a side note, when John Adams came over there, he almost ruined everything. So because John Adams was very boom, 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 and Benjamin Franklin was very knew all about people and how to wine and dine. And so when John Adams went over there, Benjamin Franklin's like, get out of here, you're ruining it. And it was the people that drove the king to help him enter the war. So, but James Armistead was one of the people that is credited with, because of him being a double spy, he really passed a lot of information. And he'll show a picture in the video. And in the picture, you have James Armistead standing next to George Washington. And it's funny, if a lot of people don't know history, say, oh, well, that was a slave standing there holding his horse. But it wasn't. That was James Armistead. He was a hero of the Battle of Bunker Hill. So it's important for us to know our history. All right? So now that I got all on a tangent like I always do, let's see, 3 minutes. All right. I'm going to try to do this in 10-minute segments, and I don't know how many it's going to be, and I'm so sorry, I don't know. All right? So we're talking about the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. Okay? When the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery, when the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery, that abolished slavery. But what happened, and we're going to go back and talk about this in a minute, but what happened was, after they abolished slavery, the Northern and Southern Democrats still wanted slavery, and so they started making all these laws in the states. Well, okay, well, you're free, but you can't vote in our state, and we're not making you citizens of our state, and we're going to do all this thing with the polling places, and you're going to have to take all these literacy tests that nobody else could pass either. And so we had to also pass the 14th and 15th Amendment. We also had to pass the Voting Rights Act, I believe it's called. Oh, me in my notes. And we also, we passed one more thing that was about that. I'll get to it in a minute. But anyway, all of that should have already been taken care of in the 13th Amendment, but Democrats kept making up all these rules, so we kept having to pass amendments and laws. So that's what that's about, okay? Before we cover that, what we're going to talk about is Thomas Jefferson. Remember when we learned about Mulberry versus Madison? And let me just kind of write some notes here. All right. So Mulberry versus Madison, of course, you guys remember, I'm sure, was about Thomas Jefferson, who was an anti-federalist, and pretend over here is written John Adams. All right. He was a federalist, big government. Thomas Jefferson, little government. Okay. Well, eventually, all the founding fathers started dying off, and they were just getting old. They were dying off. So a lot of times when the kids, as you move down the generations, they do things that the fathers wouldn't. They do things that the fathers wouldn't do. Okay. So Thomas Jefferson's party eventually became the Democratic Party. That kind of shocks me because he was anti-federalist. But even though he became the Democratic Party, all the parties really come from this side. They don't come from the Federalist side. So they became the Democratic Party. Then there were two kinds of Democrats that were coming in after Abraham Lincoln. There were the Southern Democrats and the Northern Democrats, okay? I think of Southern Democrats. I'm from North Carolina. Southern Democrats were very pro-slavery, and they said, for this, we'll go to war. And when you hear that the Civil War was not about slavery, do not believe it. It's a lie. It's like separation of church and state. It's an absolute lie. That's why they went to the mat. And they say, oh, it's about commerce. Well, in a way, it was about commerce because they wanted to slave people to do all the work for them. So I'm sure it would have affected their commerce, but it was about slavery. The nuts and bolts of it were about slavery. Do not listen to people. I don't care if they're Christians. I do not care. It is not true. If you look at the documents, it's not true. Okay? I know I'm very politically incorrect, but it's not true. All right. The Southern Democrats, in their own documents, in their own even mission statement, when they seceded in their own final documents, they prohibited the ending of slavery, and they called it the cornerstone of the Confederacy. All right. They were so pro-slavery. They just were, okay? Then you have the Northern Democrats. They wanted slavery. They were very against freeing slaves and giving blacks right to vote, anything like that. But they were not willing to secede from the Union over it. They hated it, but they weren't going to secede from the Union over it. They didn't vote for laws like that, but they weren't going to secede, okay? And then from the Democrats came the Republicans. And what the Republicans were they were men who said, we hate slavery, we want to end slavery. We're abolitionists like Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so he was a Republican. So these are, the parties kind of shifted off, and this is all going to come into play later with the 14th and 15th Amendments. That all comes into play. So from the Democrats, remember, from Thomas Jefferson, anti-federalist, anti-big government, now we've grown and grown and grown again, where we have, big government, and Republicans have become more little government. But they all started from the anti-federalists, broke off into Democrats, remember? And then you had Southern Democrats after Abraham Lincoln. And they said, if he is elected, we're seceding, he's an abolitionist. And then you had the Northern Democrats, and then you had the Republicans. The Republicans were made up of black Americans, are the ones who started the Republican Party. Like the Republican Party of Texas, I think, was started by like 23 black men and 2 white men. This was the party of black Americans, okay? So they were fighting. They were abolitionists. Interesting side note, the KKK was started as an offshoot of the Democratic Party to kill Republicans. They didn't want Republicans because they hated black people and they hated the slaves and they wanted them to be slaves. And they killed 1,500 black people, and I think it was like 2,300 white people. They killed 2,300 black people and like 1,500 white people, but they were actually killing Republicans. And they would have these cards that he showed you on the video with black faces and white faces together, and basically these were kill cards. And they were called push cards, and on the back would have the names of everybody you wanted to kill because they were voting Republican. So I think that's very interesting. Yes, they hated the blacks. Yes, they were racist. But a lot of times if black men, would say, we'll vote Democrat and all that, they would leave them alone. So, and a lot of black men stood up and said, no, we're voting Republican, and I'm sorry, we're fighting for our rights. So that was what happened, okay? So, and right, like in here, before that happened, right before Abraham Lincoln was Dred Scott. And Dred Scott, of course, the decision that black men are property and all that just churned all the slavery talk up even more. And thus we have the Civil War that broke out. All right, I'm going to start with part 2. Stay tuned. I know you're so excited about this. I can tell.